The cold seeped into my bones even through the 2 blankets I'd wrapped myself in, the kind of chill that wasn't just from the air but from deep within, a mirroring of the icy betrayal that had settled in my heart. The concrete floor of the garage was hard beneath the thin mattress, each lump and imperfection a physical manifestation of the sharp edges life had suddenly presented me with. Just feet away, separated by a flimsy wooden door and the vast silent gulf of unspoken cruelties, stood the house, my house. The house I had bought with his father. The house where I had brought him home from the hospital, where I had nursed, scraped knees, and celebrated birthdays, where I had lived, truly lived, for 40 years. And now, my son, the boy I had raised, had relegated me to the garage. He had told me, with a frustratingly calm voice, that somehow made it all worse, that I was making things difficult. Difficult for whom? For him. Living in my house with his carefully curated life that apparently had no room for the woman who had given him everything. He'd moved in promising to help out, to take care of things after life had dealt its blows. Grief leaves you vulnerable, leaves you reaching for anchors, and who better than your own child? He'd seemed so solicitous at first, so concerned. He talked about family, about looking out for each other. I'd believed him. Foolishly, heartbreakingly, I had believed the son I had poured my entire existence into. He'd started small, little suggestions about how things should be run, how my routine was disruptive. Then it escalated. My dog was too loud, my cooking smells lingered, my presence was inconvenient. The house, once a haven filled with memories, became a battleground of passive aggression and thinly veiled demands. He and his wife, Sarah, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, moved through the rooms like invaders, rearranging furniture, discarding my things, slowly, systematically, erasing me from the space. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunting the periphery of their perfect, sterile existence. The tension had been a constant low hum, like a faulty appliance in the background of my life, always present, always threatening to short-circuit. I tried to talk to him to explain how I felt, but my words seemed to bounce off him, met with blank stares or impatient sighs. He had mastered the art of making me feel like I was the problem, the irrational one, the burden. The final straw had come after a particularly tense dinner, where Sarah had complained about my clutter again, a subtle dig at the boxes of memories I still hadn't unpacked from when they'd insisted I clear out rooms for them. My son had pulled me aside later, not shouting, just that controlled, chillingly reasonable tone. "Mom," he'd said, "this isn't working. You need your own space. The garage is available. It's just temporary until you figure things out." Temporary, in my own garage. A space meant for forgotten tools and dusty lawnmowers, not a place for a mother to sleep. The air in the garage was thick with the smell of old gasoline and damp concrete, a stark contrast to the faint, pleasant scent of whatever expensive cleaner Sarah used in the house. Every night, the closing of the back door was a physical blow, shutting me out, leaving me alone with the spiders and the silence and the deafening echo of my son's words. It felt like a cruel joke. A punishment for what? For aging? For needing help? For being his mother? The humiliation was a bitter pill I swallowed with every shaky breath. I thought of all the times I had sacrificed for him, the jobs I'd turned down to be home, the sleepless nights, the worry, the endless, unconditional love. Was this the return on that investment? A cot in the garage? It was a betrayal so profound, so unexpected, that it had initially left me numb, adrift in a sea of disbelief. But as the days turned into a week, and the temporary cot began to feel permanent, the numbness started to fade, replaced by something hot and sharp, anger. Not the explosive, fleeting kind, but a deep, simmering fury that settled in my gut and began to harden my resolve. This wasn't just about a place to sleep, it was about dignity, about respect, about the fundamental human need to be treated with kindness by the people you love most in the world. He had stripped me of my comfort, my home, and my sense of security, replacing it with the cold, hard reality of the garage floor. And in that cold, hard reality, a dangerous thought began to take root. A thought that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. He wanted me out of sight, out of mind, removed from his pristine life inside the house. But the house was still mine. The legal documents, tucked away in a box I had carefully brought into the garage with me, confirmed it. It was still in my name. He might be living in it, acting like he owned it, but he didn't. Not yet. Anyway, and that fact, that one undeniable truth, felt like a lifeline in the crushing darkness of the garage. It was a small, fragile spark, but in the absolute blackness of my despair, it was enough to begin to illuminate a path forward, a path I hadn't dared to consider before. It was a path that led directly back to the house, but not in the way he expected. The history of how I ended up here was a slow, insidious creep rather than a sudden catastrophe. It started subtly after his father, my husband, passed away 5 years ago. Mark had been my rock, my partner in everything. His absence left a void so profound it felt physical, a constant ache behind my ribs. My son, David, had been living in another state, with Sarah, building his career. He'd flown back for the funeral, full of condolences and promises. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "We'll figure things out. You're not alone." At the time, it was a comfort. The house felt too big, too quiet without Mark. The upkeep was becoming a struggle. David started suggesting I sell the house, move closer to them. I resisted. This house held too many memories, too much of Mark. It was home. Then his company transferred him to a city closer to mine. Not the same town, but close enough that visiting was easy. He started coming over more often. Bringing Sarah, they'd comment on the state of the garden. "A bit overgrown, isn't it, Mom? The age of the appliances really need updating." The general sense of a house lived in, comfortable, but perhaps not magazine-ready. The comments, seemingly innocent, chipped away at my confidence. They made me feel old, incapable. Then came the temporary suggestion. Their lease was up. Finding a new place was difficult, expensive. "Why don't we just stay with you for a little while, Mom?" David had proposed. "We can help with the bills, help you around the house." It makes sense. It had sounded reasonable, logical even. Family helping family. I agreed, welcoming them into my home. My spacious, comfortable home. The house suddenly felt smaller. With their presence, their belongings started filling the spare rooms, then encroaching on the main living areas. Sarah had strong opinions on decor, on organization. She'd start cleaning, not in a helpful way, but in a way that implied my own efforts were insufficient. She'd rearrange things, claiming it made more sense, but it always felt like a subtle erasure of my own taste, my own history within these walls. David, caught between us, or perhaps just siding with his wife, would minimize my feelings. "Oh, Mom, she's just trying to help." It's not a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was my home, and I was losing control of it, piece by piece. The financial arrangement I had initially proposed, contributing to bills, quickly became murky. They'd pay some things, but selectively. They'd buy groceries, but only the things they ate. The balance of power was shifting. They weren't guests anymore. They were residents acting like owners. Their little while stretched from months into a year. The house transformed from my sanctuary into a space where I felt increasingly unwelcome. I started spending more time in my room, retreating from the shared spaces, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Friends would call, ask how I was doing, and I'd put on a brave face, say things were fine, that it was nice having family close. But the truth was, a tight knot in my stomach. I missed the quiet, the peace, the feeling of being truly at ease in my own surroundings. I missed Mark, his easygoing presence a stark contrast to the tension that now permeated every corner of the house. The conversation about me moving to the garage hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been foreshadowed by countless small slights, by the way they talked about the garage as a storage space for things they didn't want in the house, never as a usable part of the home. They'd started storing their overflow there, Exercise equipment, camping gear, boxes from Sarah's childhood home. It was full of their things, leaving little room for mine. It was as if, subconsciously, they were already preparing the space for me, the unwanted storage of their lives. I remember the chill that went down my spine the first time David casually remarked that the garage would make a good little studio apartment if it were cleaned out. I'd laughed it off then, the idea too absurd to entertain. Now it was my reality. The transition wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, steady erosion of my place, my rights, my very identity within the home I had created. It was a masterclass in manipulation, executed by the people who should have protected me. And the worst part was, for a long time, I let it happen. I shrunk myself to fit into the shrinking space they allowed me, hoping that if I made myself small enough, easy enough, the tension would ease, and we could somehow find a way to coexist. But coexistence wasn't what they wanted. They wanted dominance. They wanted the house. And they wanted me out of the way. My quiet nature, often praised as patience or resilience, had in this instance become my undoing. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't pushed back hard enough. I hadn't demanded the respect I deserved. I had retreated, and they had advanced. Now I was literally living in the space they had designated for unwanted things. A testament to their slow, successful campaign to reclaim the house as their own, even while my name remained on the deed. A fact they seemed to conveniently forget, or perhaps simply disregard. But I hadn't forgotten. The final descent into the garage was swift and brutal. After months of creeping discomfort, it wasn't a reasoned discussion, as David liked to portray it later, but an ultimatum delivered with the cold certainty of someone who knew they held all the cards. The trigger was trivial, maddeningly so. I had left a pot soaking in the sink overnight. Sarah had discovered it in the morning, and the ensuing silence, thick with disapproval, was worse than any shouting. Later, David cornered me in the living room, his expression tight with manufactured exasperation. "Mom, we need to talk. This living situation just not working for anyone.
We can't keep living like this."
He gestured vaguely around the room, as if my very presence was a blight. "You're disrupting our routine." Sarah's stressed. "I'm stressed. We need space." I felt my voice tremble as I tried to defend myself. "But this is my home." I tried to be quiet, to stay out of the way. The words felt weak, pathetic even, hanging in the air between us. His eyes hardened. "That's the point, Mom. You shouldn't have to try. It should just work." And it's not. Frankly, having you here is making things complicated. Complicated. There it was again, his favorite word for my existence. "So," he continued, his tone softening just enough to sound reasonable, "I think it's time for a change. The garage. It's got electricity. It's dry. We can get a little heater for winter. It's perfect until you can find something more permanent. Maybe look into assisted living." The mention of assisted living felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just about moving me out of the house. It was about moving me out of his life into a place where I would be someone else's responsibility. It was the ultimate dismissal. I stared at him, speechless, the air knocked out of me. He interpreted my silence as acquiescence. "Good. I'll help you move some things out there this afternoon." He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was solving a problem I had created. I couldn't speak, couldn't form a coherent thought. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer audacity, the cruelty of his demand. My son, telling me to leave my home and sleep in the garage. The same son whose feverish forehead I had held, whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose dreams I had encouraged. How had this happened? How had the boy I raised turned into this cold, calculating stranger? The move was quick, humiliating. He helped me carry my suitcase, a few boxes of clothes, the photo albums I couldn't bear to leave behind, and the document box containing the deed. Sarah watched from the doorway, a neutral expression on her face, offering no help, no word of comfort. They set up the cot, plugged in a small lamp, "There you go, Mom," David said, looking around the cluttered garage with a strained smile. "It's not so bad, right? Cozy, cozy." Surrounded by garden tools, paint cans, and their camping gear, it felt like a prison cell made of concrete and stored possessions. He closed the door, and the click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence, amplifying my isolation. I was alone in the garage. The reality of it crashed over me then, a wave of grief and shock. Tears came, silent and uncontrollable, dripping onto the worn fabric of the cot mattress. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking back and forth, the garage air chilling me to the bone. The injustice of it all was a burning coal in my chest. All my sacrifices, all my love, all my years of building a life reduced to this, a temporary solution, a problem hidden away. I looked around at the stacked boxes of their things, the lawnmower that belonged to them, the bicycles leaning against the wall. Their lives were expanding, filling every available space, while mine was being compressed, pushed into the margins. I felt stripped bare, not just of physical comfort, but of my identity as the matriarch, the homeowner, the one who had always provided. I was adrift, anchorless. The house, once my symbol of stability, now the very structure that imprisoned me in its outbuilding. The pain was immense, a gaping wound that refused to close. For the first few nights I barely slept, the shock keeping me awake, replaying every interaction, searching for where I had gone wrong, where the love had curdled into resentment and dismissal. Was I truly that difficult? Had I become a burden? The self-doubt, instilled over months of subtle criticism, gnawed at me. But beneath the pain, a flicker of something else began to stir. A seed of defiance, planted in the barren ground of betrayal. They wanted me gone. They wanted the house. They thought they had won. But they had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, my patience for complacency. They had forgotten whose name was on the deed. The first few days in the garage were a blur of humiliation and despair. The cold dampness seemed to leach the life force right out of me. Every morning I'd have to use the side door to the house to access the bathroom and kitchen. A quick furtive dash while David and Sarah were still asleep, or carefully avoiding eye contact if they were up. The air inside the house felt alien now, filled with their energy, their rules, their subtle disapproval. I'd grab a quick cup of coffee, a piece of toast, and retreat back to my concrete cell as quickly as possible. The silence of the garage somehow preferable to the strained atmosphere inside. My meals were solitary affairs, eaten perched on a plastic crate, the sound of their laughter or conversation drifting faintly from the house amplifying my isolation. The garage became my world. I organized my small collection of belongings, folding clothes neatly into the few plastic bins I had. I hung the photos of Mark and happier times on the bare studs of the wall, creating a small shrine to a life that felt impossibly distant. I spent hours just sitting, staring at the closed door to the house, lost in thought. How had I let this happen? I had always been independent, resilient. After Mark died, I had managed the finances, kept the house going, navigated my grief. Where had that strength gone? Had they slowly drained it out of me, like vampires feeding on my spirit? The feeling of being trapped was overwhelming. Trapped by my circumstances, trapped by my son's cruelty, trapped within the four walls of this cold, utilitarian space. I felt forgotten, discarded, like an old piece of furniture that no longer fit in the main rooms, relegated to storage. But the quiet, forced introspection, without the distractions of daily life inside the house, without the need to navigate their moods and demands, I had time to think, truly think. For the first time in months, I replayed conversations, noticed patterns I had ignored or minimized before. The way David would subtly undermine me, the way Sarah would make snide remarks disguised as jokes. It wasn't just about space or convenience for them. It was about control. It was about power. They wanted to push me out entirely, to take over the house and my life, and they were well on their way to succeeding. One afternoon, huddled in my blankets, I found the document box. I pulled out the deed to the house. My name was on it, clear as day. Maria Elena Rodriguez. Not David Rodriguez. Not David and Sarah Rodriguez. Mine. A wave of something hot and unfamiliar surged through me. This wasn't just a house to them, it was an asset. A stepping stone for their future, and they were willing to treat me like dirt to get it. My hands trembled as I held the paper. This piece of paper represented decades of hard work, of planning, of building a life with Mark. It was more than just a property title. It was the physical embodiment of my independence, my security, and they had tried to strip that away from me not by force, but by calculated emotional abuse and manipulation. Lying there on the uncomfortable cot, surrounded by the remnants of their transient lives, a profound shift began within me. The despair and humiliation didn't vanish, but they were joined by something else. A cold, hard clarity. They had pushed me to the absolute limit, stripped me of everything but the roof over my head, or rather the garage roof. They had underestimated the quiet strength that had always been there, buried beneath layers of love and sacrifice. They saw me as weak, as a burden, as someone they could easily discard. They were wrong. The spark of defiance I felt earlier began to grow, fueled by the injustice and the sheer audacity of their actions. It wasn't just about getting back into the house. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my power. It was about showing them and myself that I was not to be broken. I was not to be discarded. My mind, once clouded by sadness and confusion, began to clear. I started thinking logically, practically. What did I have? The deed. Ownership. What did they have? Possession, based on my unwitting consent. My consent which had been withdrawn the moment he told me to sleep in the garage. They were living in my house, and that gave me an idea. A dangerous, audacious, potentially life-altering idea. An idea that involved using the very thing they craved, the house, as the instrument of my own liberation, and perhaps their comeuppance. The cold of the garage suddenly didn't feel quite so bone-deep. A different kind of heat was starting to rise within me. The idea arrived not as a sudden bolt of inspiration, but a slow, deliberate unfolding, like a flower pushing through concrete. It started with the document box, the deed in my hand, the undeniable proof of my ownership. I sat there, tracing the words with my finger, the weight of it settling heavily, and then strangely, lightly, in my lap. He thought he had me trapped. He thought I had nowhere to go, no resources, no options but the ones he might eventually grant me, like that humiliating suggestion of assisted living. But he had forgotten this, forgotten that the house, the very source of their power over me, was legally, unequivocally mine. I looked around the garage. It was full of their stuff, their accumulation, their convenience. And I was the inconvenient one, stored away with the junk. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, but it also held a strange, empowering flavor. They had taken my comfort, my security, my sense of belonging. They had tried to make me invisible. But the house was visible. It was real. And it was a valuable asset that I owned. The plan began to form, tentatively at first, a whisper in the back of my mind that I almost dismissed as too radical, too improbable. But the more I considered it, the more I realized it wasn't improbable at all. It was perfectly logical. They wanted the house. They were living in it, treating it as their own. Well, if they were going to treat it like an income-generating asset, perhaps I should too. The thought sent a jolt through me. Rent it out? While they were living there? No, that wasn't quite right. Rent it out while he was at work. While they were both away, perhaps. It would have to be quick, decisive, leaving no room for them to stop me. But who would rent a house already occupied? It seemed impossible. But then another thought came. What if I didn't rent it to long-term tenants? What if I used a platform, a short-term rental platform? People looking for temporary accommodation. maybe while on business or visiting the area. They wouldn't need to know the complex, messy history of the place. They just needed a clean, comfortable house for a few days, a week, maybe 2. The idea, once a whisper, grew louder, more insistent. It was audacious. It was risky. It was perfect. It was the ultimate inversion of the power dynamic. He had used the house to control me, to push me out. I would use the house to reclaim my agency, to provide for myself, to show him that I was not powerless. The practicalities started to fall into place in my mind. I would need to clean the house thoroughly, clear out their things from the common areas as much as possible, make it presentable. I would need photos. I would need to create a listing, and I would need to do it all in secret, without them knowing. The tension of this clandestine operation was a different kind of tension than the one I had been living with. This was sharp, focused, laced with adrenaline. It was no longer the tension of being a victim, but the tension of being an agent, a conspirator in my own liberation. I started spending my solitary hours in the garage, researching on my old tablet. I learned about the platforms, the pricing, the logistics. I read reviews, looked at listings. It seemed daunting, but not impossible. I would need to be careful, meticulous. I would need to choose the right time, a time when they would both be out of the house for an extended period. David's work schedule was fairly regular, but Sarah worked from home sometimes. I would need to observe their patterns, find the perfect window of opportunity. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. Fear of getting caught, fear of his reaction, fear of the fallout. But the growing sense of purpose, the quiet determination that was hardening inside me, was stronger than the fear. I thought of Mark, of how he would have handled this. He wouldn't have stood for it. He would have protected me. A wave of grief washed over me, but this time it was mixed with a fierce resolve to honor his memory, by being strong, by fighting back in my own way. The garage, once a symbol of my defeat, began to feel like a headquarters, a secret planning room. I would emerge from it each morning, putting on a neutral expression, performing the role of the quiet, compliant mother, while inside, my mind was racing, plotting, preparing. The contrast between my external demeanor and my internal state was stark. A new kind of emotional landscape I was navigating. They saw the same woman they had pushed into the garage. They had no idea the storm that was brewing behind my eyes. Every time I saw them lounging on the sofa I had bought, eating at the table Mark and I had shared, the resolve solidified. This wasn't just revenge. It was reclaiming what was mine. It was a fight for my very existence. The planning became a meticulous, almost obsessive process. I used the quiet solitude of the garage to my advantage, poring over websites on my tablet, learning the ins and outs of short-term rentals. I needed to understand everything, the platforms, the pricing strategies, the guest expectations, the cancellation policies. It felt surreal, sitting in a space filled with lawn equipment and old paint cans, plotting a real estate transaction involving the very house I was locked out of. I had to be incredibly careful. I couldn't use the main house computer, obviously. My old tablet was slow and clunky, but it was my lifeline to the outside world, and the tool that would enable my plan. I created a new email address, one they wouldn't know. I started drafting the listing description in a plain text file, carefully choosing words that would make the house sound appealing without giving away its complex occupancy situation. Charming, spacious home, I wrote, perfect for business travelers or short-term visitors. The words felt both true and like a profound deception. I knew the house intimately, its quirks, its comforts, the way the afternoon sun hit the living room, just so I could paint a picture that was enticingly real. Taking the photos was going to be the trickiest part. I needed to do it when they were both gone, and do it quickly. I started paying closer attention to their schedules. David left for work reliably by 7:30 a.m. and didn't get back until after 6 p.m. Sarah was more unpredictable. Some days she'd leave for meetings, other days she'd be home all day. I needed a day when she was out. I also needed to clean the common areas before taking pictures, remove any obvious personal items of theirs, make it look neutral and inviting. This meant sneaking into the house while they were gone and working quickly. The first attempt felt like a spy mission. The moment I heard both cars leave, I slipped out of the garage, the cold morning air hitting my face. I unlocked the back door using the spare key I still had, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was silent, but felt watchful. I moved through the rooms like a phantom, tidying cushions, wiping down surfaces, putting away the magazines Sarah left scattered on the coffee table. I felt a strange mix of reclaiming my space and violating theirs. It was my house, yet I was acting like a burglar within its walls. I spent about an hour cleaning and staging, my movements tense and hurried. I decided to use my phone for the pictures. The camera quality was decent. I moved through the house room by room, trying to capture the light, the sense of space, the little details that made it a home, even if it hadn't felt like mine for a while. The living room, the dining area, the kitchen, the bedrooms, carefully avoiding the master suite, their domain, focusing on the guest rooms I would list as available. I took multiple shots of each area, trying different angles, imagining what a potential renter would want to see. The entire process was fraught with anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren made me jump, convinced they had returned. But I completed the task, my hands shaking slightly, as I slipped back into the garage, locking the back door behind me. I transferred the photos to my tablet and spent hours selecting the best ones, cropping them, editing them slightly. Looking at the pictures, it was hard to reconcile the inviting space they depicted with the reality of my life in the garage, just feet away. The contrast was stark, almost absurd, but it was also powerful. These pictures were my weapon. I uploaded the photos and the description to the short-term rental platform, creating the listing. I set the price, carefully researching comparable properties in the area. I decided to set it slightly below market value, hoping to attract bookings quickly. The platform required bank account information for payments. I used my own account, separate from the joint accounts I had once shared with Mark, and thankfully separate from any accounts David might have access to. As I hit publish, a wave of exhilaration mixed with terror washed over me. It was done. The listing was live. The house was in a sense on the market. Not for sale, but for rent. A temporary occupation that would fund my escape and serve as my declaration of independence. The waiting began. Every notification on my tablet sent a jolt through me. Would I get inquiries? Would someone actually book it? What would happen when they arrived? The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. The risk was immense, the potential fallout catastrophic. But the thought of remaining in the garage, a prisoner in my own home, was a fate far worse than any consequence I could imagine from this. This was my fight, and the house was my battleground. The first inquiry came within hours of the listing going live. A message popped up on my tablet screen, a name I didn't know, asking about availability for the following week. My heart leaped into my throat. It was real. Someone was interested. I typed out a response, trying to sound casual and professional, confirming the dates were available. More messages followed. People asking about amenities, check-in procedures, the neighborhood. I answered them all from the quiet confines of the garage, feeling like a ghost communicating with the living world outside my concrete box. The tension was almost unbearable. I had to constantly monitor David and Sarah's movements. If someone booked, I would need the house empty for their arrival. I couldn't have renters showing up while my son and his wife were lounging on the sofa. My plan hinged on finding windows of opportunity, days when they would both be out of the house for work or other commitments. Miraculously, a booking came through for a 3-night stay starting the following Monday, a couple visiting for a wedding. The timing was tight. David had a regular work schedule, but I needed Sarah too. I listened intently to their conversations through the thin back door, trying to glean any information about their plans. Over the weekend, I overheard Sarah talking about a planned shopping trip with a friend on Monday morning. This was it. My window. I would have just a few hours between them, leaving and the renters arriving. The day arrived, a Monday morning shrouded in a tense, nervous energy. I watched from the small garage window as David's car pulled out of the driveway, followed a short while later by Sarah's. The moment the street was empty, I was out of the garage like a shot, spare key in hand. The house was quiet, holding its breath. I raced through the rooms, doing a final check, making sure everything was in order, removing any last personal items of theirs I could quickly gather and stash in the garage before the renters arrived. I felt a strange detachment as I moved through the house, admiring the clean lines, the natural light, the sense of peace that returned when they weren't there. This was the house I loved, the house that felt like home. And for the next 3 days, it would be my house again, on my terms, generating income for me. I left fresh towels on the beds, a small welcome note on the kitchen counter, just like the platform suggested. I set out the key in the lockbox by the back door, providing the code to the renters via the app. I felt like a criminal covering her tracks, yet the act felt profoundly right, a defiant assertion of my ownership and my right to control my own property. Time seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the notification that the guests had arrived. I hovered near the back door, listening for sounds, my heart pounding. Finally, I heard a car pull into the driveway, voices, the rattle of the lockbox. I retreated further into the garage, hidden from view, listening as they entered the house. Their voices, polite and unfamiliar, echoed slightly in the space that was usually filled with the subtle tension of my son and his wife. It was real. They were here. Renters were in my house, paying me to be there. A wave of triumph, sharp and potent, washed over me, quickly followed by a knot of anxiety about what would happen when David and Sarah returned. For the next 3 days, I lived a strange, bifurcated existence. I remained in the garage, emerging only when I was sure the renters were out exploring the town. I would slip into the house, grab food, use the bathroom, clean up any minor messes, and then retreat back to the garage before they returned. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking, but also incredibly empowering. I was managing my property, providing hospitality, and generating income, all while technically being homeless and hidden away feet from my own kitchen. I received a message from the renters on the platform. "Lovely home. Very comfortable. Thank you." It was a small message, but it felt like a validation, a sign that I was capable, that I could do this. The money from the rental, deposited into my account, felt like dirty, wonderful gold. It was proof that I wasn't helpless, that I had options he hadn't accounted for. The bittersweet reality was that the house was now occupied by strangers, people who paid to be there, while my own son had banished me to the garage for free. The irony was a sharp, constant companion, but the empowerment outweighed the pain. For now, I had taken action. I had seized control. The calm facade I presented to the world, the resigned mother living in the garage, was a carefully constructed lie. Beneath the surface, a storm was gathering, powered by a quiet fury and the knowledge that I had just unleashed a force that would inevitably lead to a confrontation I no longer feared. The renters checked out on Thursday morning, leaving the house empty once more. The silence after their departure felt different this time, not lonely but expectant, like the hush before a storm. I went into the house to clean and reset, moving quickly, the familiar space feeling charged with the secret life it had just hosted. I changed the linens, vacuumed, wiped down surfaces, erasing the temporary hansiki of the strangers who had occupied it. As I worked, a sense of calm settled over me. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it was tempered by a quiet certainty. I had done it. I had taken control. The money was in my account, tangible proof of my action, and the feeling of standing in the empty house, knowing that I had orchestrated everything from my little corner of banishment, was incredibly potent. I knew the confrontation was imminent. David and Sarah would return, find the house pristine, perhaps notice something subtly out of place, a moved item, a faint scent that wasn't their own. And the platform notified hosts when a rental was complete and payment processed. The digital trail existed. It was only a matter of time before they discovered what I had done. I returned to the garage not with the usual sense of defeat, but with a quiet strength I hadn't felt in months. I sat on my cot, not hiding, but waiting. Waiting for the sound of their cars. Waiting for the inevitable questions, the accusations, the anger. I rehearsed in my mind what I would say. No shouting, no hysterics. Just the quiet truth. My name is on the deed. This is my house. I am the owner. You made me sleep in the garage. I rented out my house. Simple, undeniable facts. David's car pulled into the driveway first, followed shortly by Sarah's. I heard the back door open, the familiar sounds of them entering the house. I listened intently, my body tense, ready. I heard them talking, mundane conversation about their day. Then silence, a longer silence than usual. I imagined them noticing something, a flicker of confusion, then suspicion. Then I heard David's voice, sharp, cutting through the quiet. Ma'am. His tone was demanding, already laced with irritation. I didn't answer immediately. I waited a beat, letting the silence hang in the air, letting him come to me. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching the back door that led to the garage. The door opened, revealing his face, contorted in a mixture of confusion and anger. Sarah hovered behind him, her eyes wide, darting around the garage as if seeing it, truly seeing it, for the first time. Mom, what's going on? The house? It's different. It's like, he trailed off, searching for the right word, his gaze sweeping over my cot, my few belongings. Who was here? He demanded, his voice rising. I looked at him, calm, meeting his furious gaze directly. The fear I expected wasn't there, only a quiet, steady resolve. Renters, I said, my voice low but clear. I rented the house out. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken history and future consequences. His face paled, then flushed crimson. You what? Are you insane? You can't do that. This is our home. He stepped fully into the garage, advancing towards me, Sarah trailing behind him. Your home? I repeated, the irony not lost on me. You made me sleep in the garage of my home, David, while you lived comfortably inside. It was insane. You didn't tell us, Sarah interjected, her voice high-pitched. How could you do this without telling us? I turned my gaze to her, a faint smile touching my lips. Tell you? Why would I tell you? You didn't seem interested in my life or where I slept. You were too busy deciding where my furniture should go, or complaining about a pot in the sink. David recovered his voice, his anger boiling over. This is illegal. You can't just rent out a house we're living in. Actually, David, I said, standing up slowly, facing him squarely. It's not illegal at all. My name is on the deed. I am the owner. You are living in my house. And since you deemed the main part of the house unsuitable for your mother, forcing her into the garage, I decided to make the main part of the house suitable for paying guests instead. It seemed like the logical solution. The look on his face was priceless. Shock, disbelief, fury, and beneath it all, a dawning realization that he had severely miscalculated. He had pushed me too far. He had treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, like I had no power. And in doing so, he had inadvertently shown me where my true power lay. The garage, my place of exile, was suddenly transformed. It wasn't a prison cell anymore. It was the command center from which I had launched my counteroffensive. And the battle had just begun. The confrontation escalated quickly from disbelief to outright rage. David, finding his usual calm manipulation ineffective against my quiet resolve, resorted to shouting, "You manipulative old woman! How dare you! Get those people out of my house!" He took a step towards me, his fists clenched. Sarah grabbed his arm, a nervous look on her face. "David, calm down." "Calm down?" he roared, turning on her for a second before focusing his fury back on me. She just rented out our house from under us while I was at work, while you were out. How did she even do that? He looked around the garage again, as if searching for clues. I remained standing, meeting his gaze steadily. It's not your house, David. It's mine. And I didn't rent it out from under you. I rented it out from the owner. Me. I held up the document box, just for a moment. A silent reminder. And you were out, because you chose to be. As for how I did it, necessity is the mother of invention. And being forced to sleep in a cold garage by your own son creates a great deal of necessity. His face was purple with rage. You think this is funny? Do you think this is some kind of game? No, David, I said softly. I don't think it's funny. I think it's incredibly sad. Sad that it came to this. Sad that my own son would treat me this way. But it's not a game. This is about survival. This is about dignity. This is about reclaiming what is mine. He started pacing the small garage space, running a hand through his hair. We had an agreement. I moved in to help you, to take care of you. Help me? By pushing me into the garage? By making me feel unwelcome in my own home. That wasn't help, David. That was taking over. That was trying to erase me. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice shaky. What about the next renters? You have more booked, don't you? I nodded. Yes. The house is booked for several weeks. Back to back. Another wave of shock washed over their faces. They hadn't realized the scale of it. The planning that had gone into it. You can't stay here, David said, his voice lower now. A dangerous edge to it. You can't just live in the garage while strangers are in the house. And whose fault is that? I challenged gently. You're the one who decided I shouldn't sleep in the house. The garage is the space you allocated for me. So here I am. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He had created this situation, thinking it would make me compliant, dependent, easy to manage. Instead, it had forged me into something harder, something unbreakable. We'll get a lawyer, Sarah threatened, finding some footing in the idea of legal leverage. You can't just do this. There must be laws about this. Feel free, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. Show your lawyer the deed. Show them where your name is, and explain to them why the legal owner of a property is sleeping in the garage while you occupy the main house. I'm sure they'll find it illuminating. I knew enough about property law to know they were on shaky ground. As long as my name was on the deed, the house was mine. Any arrangement we had was informal, based on trust they had violated. The income from the rentals was mine, and their attempt to pressure me to force me out could potentially be seen very unfavorably if it ever came to a legal battle. The power dynamic had completely inverted. They were no longer the ones in control, dictating my life from inside the house. I was the owner, controlling access to the house, generating income from it, and they were the uncomfortable occupants, their position suddenly precarious. They stood there, stunned, realizing the trap they had set for me had sprung shut on them instead. The garage, once a symbol of my marginalization, now felt like a fortress. My quiet strength, once hidden, was now on full display. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt like the homeowner. The owner who had been wronged, but who had found a way to fight back, using the very tool they had tried to wield against me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The fallout from this would be immense, likely shattering any remaining semblance of a relationship with my son and his wife. But as I stood there facing their fury from my humble garage, I felt a sense of liberation that was worth any cost. I had been pushed into the darkness, and in that darkness, I had found my light and the strength to shine it back at the ones who had tried to extinguish me. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a tense stalemate. David and Sarah retreated into the house, slamming the door, leaving me alone again in the garage. But this time the air felt different, charged not with despair but with the residual energy of battle. I could hear muffled shouting from inside, their arguments laced with frustration and panic. They knew I had outmaneuvered them. They knew their comfortable setup, Their slow takeover of my life and my property was now in jeopardy. The subsequent days were fraught with unspoken conflict. They tried ignoring me, pretending I didn't exist in the garage. But it was impossible. My presence, my actions, hung over the house like a persistent fog. I continued my routine, emerging cautiously to use the facilities, but now there was a new dynamic. They avoided eye contact, their faces tight with resentment. They would leave the kitchen abruptly if I entered, or wait pointedly outside the bathroom door if I took too long. Their passive aggression had returned, but it felt weaker now, stripped of its former power. They weren't dealing with the quietly resigned mother anymore. They were dealing with the woman who had rented out her own house from the garage. The renters continued to arrive and depart. I managed the logistics from my phone and tablet, coordinating check-ins, responding to guest messages, ensuring the house was clean and ready between stays. It was exhausting, physically and emotionally, but the tangible results, the money arriving in my bank account, were a powerful motivator. Each deposit felt like a small victory, a confirmation that I was capable, independent, and resourceful. I used some of the money to improve my situation in the garage. I bought a thicker mattress pad, a better heater, a more comfortable chair. It wasn't the main house, but I was making it habitable, making it my space within the space they had confined me to. I even put up a small shelf for books and a few more cherished photos. The garage was no longer just a place of banishment. It was becoming my sanctuary, a symbol of my resilience and my newfound independence. David and Sarah, I assumed, were trying to figure out their next move. I heard them on the phone sometimes, talking in hushed tones. Lawyers, I suspected. They likely discovered quickly what I already knew, that legally they had very little standing, as long as my name was on the deed. Their claim was based on occupancy and a presumed future inheritance, neither of which superseded my current ownership rights. The irony continued to sting. They had wanted the house so badly, had schemed and manipulated to get it, only to find that the legal documentation they had ignored was the very thing that gave me the power to disrupt their plans entirely. I didn't relish their discomfort. Exactly. But there was a deep, quiet satisfaction in seeing the architects of my misery facing the consequences of their own actions. They had underestimated me, and they were paying the price. The relationship with David was fractured beyond repair. The casual cruelty he had shown, the cold calculation of his actions, had severed the ties that bound us. It was a source of profound sadness, a grief entirely separate from the grief I felt for Mark. Losing a child, not to death, but to their own choices, to a fundamental failure of empathy and love, was a unique kind of pain. I mourned the son I thought I had, the son who would never have treated me this way. But alongside the grief was the undeniable truth that I could not go back to the way things were. I could not unlearn the lesson they had taught me in the garage. They had pushed me to the edge, and in doing so had shown me that I had the strength to fly. The house, once a symbol of comfortable domesticity and then of my painful displacement, was now something else entirely. It was a tool, a resource, a means to an end. It was providing for me, giving me the means to plan my next steps, to find a truly independent future for myself, a future that didn't involve living under the thumb of a manipulative son and his equally calculating wife. The garage door, once the barrier between me and my home, felt less like a cage and more like a door to the outside world, a world where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. Living in the garage while managing the house rentals became a surreal routine. I'd wake up to the sound of their cars leaving, wait a safe interval, and then emerge. The air in the garage was often damp, smelling of concrete and exhaust fumes, a constant reminder of my circumstances. But stepping into the main house, even if only for a short time, felt like entering another world. I moved through the rooms, adjusting thermostat settings, leaving fresh linens for arriving guests, tidying the spaces they shared with me. The house was clean, comfortable, and filled with the transient energy of strangers. It was a stark contrast to the cold, cluttered space I inhabited. The income from the rentals was steadily building. It was more than enough to cover my basic needs and was accumulating into a significant sum, a cushion that would allow me to finally leave and find a place of my own. I started researching small apartments, talking to real estate agents on the phone when I was sure David and Sarah weren't home. The conversations were discreet, framed around finding a place for a friend or a relative. The true, complicated story locked away in my own experience. The tension with David and Sarah was a constant undercurrent. They spoke to me only when necessary. Their words clipped and cold. They made it clear they resented my presence and my action. They had tried to evict the first set of renters, threatening them, telling them they were being scammed. The renters, confused and uncomfortable, had contacted the platform. The platform, in turn, had contacted me. I had calmly explained the situation, provided proof of ownership, and assured them the renters had every right to be there. The platform had sided with me, warning David and Sarah against interfering with future bookings. Their attempts to disrupt the rentals had failed, only reinforcing their powerlessness in the face of my legal ownership and quiet determination. I saw a lawyer myself, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davison. I laid out the entire story, how David had moved in, how he and Sarah had slowly pushed me out, how he had made me sleep in the garage, and how I had responded by renting out the house. She listened patiently, her expression one of professional calm mixed with obvious sympathy. She confirmed what I already suspected. My legal position was strong. As the owner, I had the right to occupy, rent out, or sell the property. They were, in effect, tenants at will, with no formal lease, and I could legally ask them to leave. Though the process might take time. She advised me on the proper legal steps if I wanted to formally remove them, but for now managing the rentals and accumulating funds felt like the right strategy. It provided income and asserted my ownership in a tangible way. The conversation with Ms. Davison was empowering, having a legal professional validate my position, confirm that I wasn't the one in the wrong, solidified my resolve. It wasn't just emotional payback, it was a sound strategy for securing my future. I wasn't just a wronged mother, I was a property owner exercising her rights. The garage, that symbol of my humiliation, now felt like the launching pad for my new life. I spent hours there, not just enduring, but planning my move, my future, the small independent life I would build for myself away from the toxicity of their resentment, entitlement. The house itself felt less like a cherished home and more like a valuable asset that was serving its purpose, providing the means for my escape. The memories within its walls were still precious, but they were now tinged with the bitterness of betrayal. I knew I couldn't stay there, not even in the main house, once I had the means to leave. The space was too contaminated by their cruelty, too filled with the echoes of their disrespect. My focus shifted from proving a point to securing my independence. Every booking confirmation, every deposit into my account, brought me closer to freedom. The physical discomfort of the garage was temporary, a small price to pay for the liberation that was within reach. I was no longer reacting to their cruelty. I was acting proactively, building my own future, using the very resource they had tried to seize as the foundation for my new beginning. The quiet woman who had been pushed aside was gone. In her place was someone forged in the cold of the garage, resilient, resourceful, and utterly determined to reclaim her life. As the weeks turned into a couple of months, the situation remained incredibly tense but stable. The house continued to be booked, the routine of managing guests from the garage a strange new normal. David and Sarah had stopped trying to interfere with the renters, their initial fury seemingly replaced by a simmering resentment and a grudging acceptance of the bizarre reality I had created. They were still living in the house, technically, but they were sharing it with a rotating cast of strangers. Their privacy invaded, their sense of ownership undermined, all while the legal owner resided just feet away in the garage they had banished her to. The irony of the situation continued to sustain me. They had wanted the comfort and space of the house without the perceived burden of me. Now they had the house, but their comfort was gone, replaced by the awkward reality of coexisting with paying guests and the constant silent judgment of the woman they had wronged. I overheard snippets of their conversations sometimes. Complaints about the noise the renters made, about having to be quiet when guests were sleeping, about the inconvenience of sharing the kitchen or the living room. It was clear they were miserable. Good, they had made me miserable for much longer, and in a far more profound way. The money I had saved was now substantial. I had enough for a deposit on a small rental apartment in a neighboring town, enough to cover several months of rent and living expenses. It wasn't the grand old house, but it would be entirely mine, a place free from their judgment, free from the cold concrete floor, free from the ghosts of betrayal. I had found the apartment, signed the lease, and arranged for a small moving truck. I did it all discreetly, during the day when they were both out, using the money I had earned from renting out their temporary accommodation. The feeling of signing that lease, of knowing I had a safe, warm, independent space waiting for me, was overwhelming. It was the culmination of months of quiet planning and unwavering determination. The garage had served its purpose. It had been my crucible, the place where I had been broken down and then forged anew. It was where I had found the clarity and the strength to fight back, not with anger and confrontation initially, but with quiet strategy and unwavering resolve. I packed my few belongings in the garage, the clothes, the photos, the document box, the warmer blankets I had bought. There wasn't much. They had already taken up so much space in the house, leaving me with little. But what I had was enough. It was what I needed to start over. The day I was scheduled to leave was a Wednesday. I waited until David had left for work. Sarah was still home, working in the office. I didn't need her permission or her knowledge, but a part of me wanted her to know I was leaving, that I was finally free of their imposed confinement. I opened the back door that led from the garage into the house. Sarah looked up from her laptop, startled to see me standing there, framed by the garage doorway. I wasn't just slipping in to use the bathroom this time. I was standing tall, my few bags at my feet. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice calm and clear. I found a place of my own. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise in her otherwise guarded expression. She didn't say anything, just stared at me. "The house is booked again, starting tomorrow," I continued. "I've left instructions for the next guests. You can continue to manage the rentals if you like, or you can stop. That's up to you. But the income is mine, it's in my account, and the house is still in my name. I'll figure out what I'm doing with it eventually. But for now, it's paying for my freedom." I looked around the house one last time, at the furniture, the walls, the space that held so many memories, both good and painful. "You wanted the house," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "You got it, but you lost something else." I didn't wait for a response. I turned, picked up my bags, and walked out of the garage, towards the small moving truck waiting discreetly down the street. As I drove away, I looked back at the house. It stood there, solid and imposing, a symbol of the life I had built and the life I had lost, but also of the unexpected strength I had found in the most unlikely of places. The garage door was closed, hiding the empty space where I had resided. It wasn't a happy ending, not neatly tied with a bow. The relationship with my son was broken, perhaps irrevocably. The future of the house was uncertain. But as I drove towards my new, small, independent life, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had been pushed into the darkness, but I had found my way back to the light, carrying the hard-won knowledge that even when you feel completely powerless, you still hold the keys to your own liberation. Sometimes quite literally, my son made me sleep in the garage, and in doing so, he showed me the way out. The small apartment was exactly what I needed. Clean, quiet, and entirely mine. No tiptoeing, no strained silences, no feeling like an intruder. The few pieces of furniture I brought from the garage and storage fit perfectly, creating a cozy space that felt like a true sanctuary. I unpacked my photos, arranging them on a shelf. Mark's smiling face, pictures of happier family gatherings before things changed, snapshots of moments of quiet joy. They were reminders of a past, but also anchors for the future I was building. The first few nights in a real bed, in a quiet room, felt like an unbelievable luxury. I slept deeply, the tension that had been a constant companion for months finally beginning to dissipate. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. It was the sound of being truly alone, but not isolated. I kept the rental listing active for the house. The bookings continued, managed remotely from my tablet. The income was still arriving, a steady stream that not only covered my expenses but allowed me to build a significant savings cushion. It was an ongoing, tangible reminder of the power I had reclaimed. I hadn't cut David and Sarah off completely. The practicalities of the house prevented that, but our communication was limited and strictly transactional, revolving around guest logistics or minor issues at the property. They were still living there, I assumed, enduring the constant flow of strangers and the undeniable truth of my ownership. I felt no need for further confrontation. My actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The house was now their cage, a gilded one perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. A space where they were constantly reminded of their failed attempt to seize control and the unexpected resilience of the woman they had tried to discard. I received an email from David a few months after I moved out. It was short, devoid of apology or warmth, asking about the possibility of buying the house from me. He mentioned their desire for stability, for a place that was truly theirs. The sheer audacity of the request, after everything that had happened, was breathtaking. He wanted to buy the very house he had tried to take from me, the house where he had forced me to sleep in the garage, using the leverage he had gained by doing so. I reread the email several times, a bitter smile playing on my lips. It was another attempt at control, at regaining the upper hand. He likely assumed I needed the money, that I would jump at the chance to sell, but I didn't need to jump. The rentals were providing for me, giving me options. I consulted with Ms. Davison. She outlined the process, the market value, the potential complexities of selling to them given our history. I considered it carefully. Selling would provide a large sum of money, allowing me to buy a smaller property outright, securing my financial future completely. But selling to David felt like a capitulation, a final surrender of the house to the people who had used it to hurt me. It felt wrong, like rewarding their bad behavior. I thought about the garage, about the coal, about the feeling of being utterly alone and betrayed. I thought about the quiet resolve that had grown in that space. I thought about the strength I had found when I had nothing left to lose. Selling the house, my house, to him felt like erasing that journey, like diminishing the significance of the battle I had fought and won, not just for the house, but for my own soul. I decided against it, at least for now. I didn't respond to David's email immediately. I let it sit, a testament to his continued entitlement and my newfound freedom from his demands. The house for now would continue to be a rental property, a source of income, a symbol of my resilience, and a constant, inconvenient reminder to my son of the mother he had tried to break. My life was smaller now, in terms of square footage, but it was infinitely larger in terms of peace, independence, and self-respect. I had lost a son, in a way, and a certain version of the future I had imagined. But I had found myself, and that in the end was a trade worth making. The quiet woman who had lived in the garage was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had fought for her dignity, and who was finally truly free. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm in my small apartment. I spent my days reading, gardening in the small patio area, connecting with old friends I had drifted away from during the years of quiet struggle in my own house. The constant tension that had been a backdrop to my life for so long had dissipated, replaced by a calm sense of contentment. The house continued to be booked through the rental platform. I managed it all, remotely, a disembodied landlord to a procession of temporary occupants. I hired a cleaning service to come in between stays, relieving myself of the need to go back there regularly, reducing contact with David and Sarah to the absolute minimum. The income remained steady, providing a comfortable living and adding to my savings. I used some of the money to travel, something Mark and I had always planned to do but never got around to. A short trip down the coast, a visit to a friend in another state. Each trip felt like a small act of defiance, a reclaiming of the life I had put on hold. I would send postcards to friends, writing about the places I visited, the beauty I saw. I didn't send one to David. The silence between us remained thick and unbroken, punctuated only by necessary business-like messages about the house. He didn't bring up buying it again. Perhaps he couldn't afford it, or perhaps he finally understood that the house was more than just bricks and mortar to me. It was a symbol of my fight, my victory. Occasionally I would drive by the old neighborhood. I wouldn't stop, just a slow pass by the house. It always looked neat, well maintained by the cleaning service. Sometimes I would see a car I didn't recognize in the driveway, belonging to the current renters. I never saw David or Sarah outside. It was like they were still hiding inside, trapped by their own choices, sharing my house with strangers, while I was out in the world, living my life. There was a bitter sweetness to it. The house I had loved, the place where I had raised my son, was now a commercial entity, a source of income, managed from afar. It wasn't the future I had envisioned, certainly not the one where my son and his family would share it with me, caring for me in my later years. That dream had died a slow, painful death, but in its place a new life had emerged, unexpected and fiercely independent. I had been pushed into the garage, into a space of darkness and despair, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient and clearer about my own worth than I had ever been. The quiet woman who had always put others first, who had shrunk herself to fit into the spaces others allowed her, was gone. In her place was a woman who took up space, who asserted her rights, who built her own sanctuary. The garage, that cold, damp space, became a powerful symbol for me. It represented the lowest point, the ultimate betrayal, but also the birthplace of my defiance, the forge where my strength had been tempered. It was a reminder that even when stripped of everything, you still possess the most important thing, yourself, and the power to choose how you respond. The future of the house remained uncertain. I wasn't sure if I would ever sell it, or what I would do with the accumulated wealth. Perhaps I would establish a foundation, support a cause. Perhaps I would buy a small cottage by the sea. The possibilities felt endless. A vast landscape stretching out before me, a stark contrast to the cramped confines of the garage. My journey hadn't been about revenge in the end. Not truly. It was about reclaiming my life, about finding my voice when it had been silenced, about standing up for myself when everyone I loved had let me down. It was about transforming betrayal into empowerment, resignation into resilience. And as I sat in my quiet apartment, bathed in the afternoon sun, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had survived, I had endured, and I had found my way back to myself. A little broken perhaps, but whole in a way I hadn't been before. The woman who had slept in the garage was free. Final thoughts often circle back to the beginning, don't they? Back to the cold concrete floor, the smell of gasoline, the sound of the latch clicking shut. It's hard to believe that the person huddled on that thin mattress, heartbroken and humiliated, is the same person I am now. That time in the garage, though filled with pain, was also a time of profound clarity, stripped of the comforting illusions of family loyalty and unconditional love. I was forced to confront the raw reality of my situation, and in that stark reality, I found the truth about myself. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a burden. I was a woman who had given everything, only to be cast aside, and who, when faced with the ultimate indignity, found the strength to fight back. The house, that beautiful old house, became a character in the story, didn't it? A silent witness to the unraveling of a family and the quiet revolution of one woman. It was the prize they sought, the weapon they used, and ultimately, the tool of my liberation. I still own it. It continues to generate income, managed now with a detachment that surprises even me. It feels less like a home and more like a business asset, a legacy of the battle I fought there. I haven't decided what its final fate will be. Maybe I will sell it someday, when the pain has faded further, and use the money to truly secure my future and maybe even help others. Maybe I will keep it, a distant reminder of the journey. I sometimes imagine the renters, strangers walking through the rooms where my life unfolded, unaware of the silent drama embedded in the walls. Are they comfortable? Do they notice anything? Do they sense the echoes of betrayal and resilience? I don't know, and I don't need to know. My focus is forward now. My relationship with David remains strained, almost non-existent. There have been no apologies, no attempts at genuine reconciliation. Perhaps one day, years from now, something will shift. But I don't hold my breath. I have learned that some breaks are irreparable, some betrayals too deep to mend. It's a heavy truth to carry, the loss of a child's love, but it's a truth that set me free in other ways. I am no longer defined by my role as a mother or a wife or a homeowner in the way I once was. I am simply me, a woman who survived, a woman who was undervalued and betrayed, but who found her quiet strength in the darkest of places and used it to reclaim her life. The garage door is closed, but the path it opened remains wide open. My life is different now, smaller in some ways, but richer in independence and self-knowledge. And as I sit here, comfortable and secure in my own space, I know that the most valuable property I possess is not the house, but the unbreakable spirit that was forged in the cold heart of the garage.